Hello and welcome to this short video on how do I know my questions are good. This video is designed for educators or anyone who's actually making tests to assess members of staff or students. So hopefully you've checked out the video first as to how to make my own image interpretation tests, and from that you have got the individual response sheet, which allows the student to respond to the tests that you are making. You've created your own images and you've got your own test bank, and the students have responded in those RadBench response sheets. So all you need to do now is to copy that information into an Excel sheet, and then from that we're going to run a simple form of item response theory in order to be able to assess whether the questions that you've made, the cases that you've got, are they of adequate difficulty, and do they actually discriminate, i.e. do the weaker students get the harder questions wrong. So let's go forward and take a look at what you've done. So here we have the raw data sheet, and as you can see the organisation has used the RBTC 19, which is a disease prevalence of 50%. So 50% of these cases would have been normal and 50% would have been abnormal. And they had 30 questions in their test bank, and they had 40 people respond to the test. And as you can see, the scores that are recorded there are the PCE scores per question, which is a maximum score of 3. So anything between 0.5 and 3, they did actually get the question right. It's just a question of how right they got it, and if they've got a score of 0, they actually got the question wrong. So that's the first stage. We've at least got the raw data to work on. So the first step is that we're going to binarize the data. So any cell that's got a 0 on it, it stays 0, and anything else we're going to convert it from what it was before. So it could be 0.5, it could be 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5 or 3. I'm going to convert all those to 1s. That's step 1. And in step 2 now, what we're going to do is we're going to sum the total score per student. So for example, RAD1, if we sum the numbers across to the right hand side, they scored 26 out of 30. They got 26 cases correct out of 30. And then we're also going to sum the number by question. So if we look at question 1, 37 of the 40 people who took the test got question 1 correct. And so we just need these sums now by question and by student. So now we want to see how our test has performed. So what we're going to do by question, we're going to take the total number of correct responses per question and divide it by the total number of people who took the test, which is 40. So that's a very simple calculation, and then this number that we get is called the difficulty index, which rates from 0 to 1. So the harder the question, the closer its rating will be to 0. So the easy question, a really, really easy question, would have a difficulty index of 1. So now what we're going to do is we're going to rank this table based on difficulty. So as you can see, the easiest question in the paper, well, easiest questions on the paper were question 11 and question 17, and the hardest question was question 27. And then we need to code up these questions now to make it nice and easy to see. So anything below 50%, i.e. 0.5, we're going to code as red because they're really tough questions. Anything above 0.9, i.e. 90%, is going to be green. They're relatively easy questions. And anything in between, we're going to code as amber. Now the next step is to consider the discrimination index of these questions. We need to know whether the question discriminates, i.e. the weaker students get the more difficult questions wrong. So for that we need to go back to step 2, and as you can see on the screen here, this is the raw data that we had at step 2. So copy and paste that into another tab of Excel so you don't make a mess of the data, and we will go forward from there. Our first step now is to rank this population based on their total score. So as you can see, the best performing person in this particular test was RAD 28 and the weakest person was RAD 36. So that's all we need to do so far, and let's go to the next slide. So now what I've done here is I've split the population into 2 equal halves. So there's 20 students in the upper group, which are now coloured blue. Let's call on the blue team. And in the cream team, that is the weaker performing students. That's the bottom 20. And what we've done is to add up the total number of students who got each of the questions right. So as you can see, for question 1, the best performers, 20 students, got that question correct, but in the weaker group, only 17 got that question correct. A little bit of maths again. Here we see the formula for calculating the discrimination index. So we're going to take the total number of correct answers in the top group, the blue group, take away the total number of correct answers in the cream group, the bottom group, and divide all that by the total number of candidates in each group, which in our case is 20. That's going to be on the next slide. But just something about the discrimination index first. This is basically a polarization index. So if the output that we get from our formula is negative, it means that the question is not discriminating. It's a poor question. It means that the weaker students may or may not perform better than the better students. If you get 0, it doesn't mean one thing or another, other than the question is probably not great, and we need to consider replacing that going forward. But a positive index score would mean that the question is good, and the more positive that number is, the better. So that's what this thing means. So on the next slide, let's actually look at the next phase. So here's the next critical step. We're going to take the numbers by question, the totals by question, and we're going to flip them so that we've got them in a vertical line. So as you can see, for each question now, we know how many people in the higher group and the lower group got the answer correct. And now we apply the discrimination index formula, and these on the screen are the results that you get. So let's have a look at the detail. I've coloured them in for you to make it easier. As you can see, we've got 2 in amber with a discrimination index of 0. So we need to consider replacing these questions for future tests. But it might be worth giving the case another run in another test just to see whether you get a similar response. But the indication is that these are not really good questions. And question 19 has got a negative discrimination index, so that's definitely not a good question. We need to scrap that one and not use that one again. So overall, what have we learned from making our test? Well, probably we've realised that it's not as easy as we thought to make these tests that have suitable difficulty and also discrimination. So we've realised that there are probably 3 questions in here that we won't use again. We've also learned that 2 of the questions are particularly difficult. We might consider having 1 more question to maybe harden the test up a little bit, but overall a lot of the questions have done very, very well. We've selected well, and we're ready to go forward and move them into other tests. And just because that's the result that we found now with this particular cohort, we need to now take those questions, mix them up with other questions, and try them again in other tests. And over time, hopefully you will find that your difficulty and discrimination per question holds up through multiple tests. And if that's the case, then you can be reasonably confident that they are good questions to have in your image interpretation tests, and the results that you get mean that if the test says that the member of staff or student is competent to a standard which you want them to be, i.e. Above 90%, well then actually the test is a fair test and they're ready to move forward and do some clinical audits and see how they perform in clinical practice. Hope you enjoyed that.